Hello, my name is Alex Plaza. I am a principal architect with Quest Software. Today we're going to discuss the cache credential utility. This utility comes with Migration Manager for Active Directory, is now part of the product. We'll discuss items such as use cases, configurations, prerequisites, deployment, troubleshooting, and where some additional resources you can use to get more information about the cache credential utility. So typically, the cache credential utility is used to address remote users that do not come into an office and are typically VPN'd in. So these types of users, we cannot use our traditional RUM console, RUM agent deployment mechanism to migrate these users, as they are not connected to a network, and when they are disconnected from VPN, do not have access to the domain controllers. So the cache credential utility looks to solve this problem by allowing the end user, when they install the utility, to also cache their target credentials, so when they reboot the machine, that they can log back in. So some people that might be interested in the utility are going to be the system engineers, consultants, architects, migration engineers, anybody really who's going to be responsible or executing these migrations. They should have a good understanding of Migration Manager for Active Directory, as that's going to be one of the prerequisites to be completed. Understanding of Microsoft Active Directory, name resolution, understanding of what the resource process manager is in the Migration Manager suite, and a working understanding of how migrations work from end to end. Some of the prerequisites that are required for cache credential utility to work: the objects must have been migrated by Migration Manager for Active Directory. This will place an entry in the vmover ini file for both the users and groups that have been migrated, and this is required as part of the deployment. There must be a minimum of a one-way trust between the two domains. The target domain controller must be accessible via the VPN solution. So when the user logs in and connects to the VPN, they should be able to reach the source domain controller and the target domain controller at the same time. During this phase of the migration, both the source and target objects must be enabled, and this is because we're going to validate the target password, and in order for that to happen, that account must be enabled. And lastly, the user must know their password. So if we're using DirSync, Migration Manager's DirSync to synchronize passwords, then the user should be aware of what that password is. If they do not have a password sync going, then the user must be informed what their target password must be. So how does this work? So there's a couple different ways that we can deploy this. Either user initiated or through a third-party software deployment, and we'll discuss both of those approaches. Once the utility is installed, it runs as a system service and will automatically start. So what it's looking for is particularly the vmover ini file, and making sure there's an entry in that file for the logged on user. If the user is present in that file, it will trigger the cache credential utility to start its process. If it's not, if the user is not in the vmover ini file, the utility will continue to check for an updated version of the vmover ini file to see if an entry has been added. And if it has, then the utility will start the process. So there are several items that must be configured to get this working. First of all, you must provide a network location for where your vmover ini file is going to reside. You also need to provide a location for your success and logs to be placed. And then lastly, you need an account in the target domain that has the rights to join computers to the target domain. We recommend that you put these files either on a DFS share. You can put them on the net logon share. I would not recommend putting the log files on the net logon share, as you'll replicate those logs to all your other DCs. So I would put that on a member server. you can certainly use the Migration Manager console as that location. Make sure that you're not using a Windows workstation operating system, as there is a limited number of remote connections that can be made to that. So if you're using a server operating system, everything should be fine. You'll need to have a network path and a UNC path available to retrieve the files. The users should be able to reach those files and execute the utility. And lastly, the user should also have the rights to write to the log share. If the user is not going to be doing the migration themselves, we can push that through the RUM console. Again, the utility is going to read the vmover ini file to make sure that the user's got an entry in it. We also have to have the ability to write success and error logs to the path. There is a script that comes along with the utility that will set up not only the shares, but the permissions, including the log share. If you don't create the log share, which the script does not do from the onset, when the utility runs, the agent will create those log shares for you. So the target account that is required and must have the rights to join the computer to the domain. You would likely want to test that manually first to make sure that that account does give you the proper rights. In order to provide the credentials to the utility, there is an exe that comes along with the product to help you encrypt the password. So that utility is the cachecredconfig.exe. And along with a couple of parameters, you would run it in a command prompt, in an administrative command prompt. And the command would be cachecredconf.exe-encrypt, and then domain /username, semicolon, password. If for some reason the domain / format does not work, you can try a UPN format, as we've seen in some instances that the domain / format does not work. Once that command is run, it will produce an alphanumeric string in the command window. You would take and copy that string into the update.msi cmd file, and there is a location specified for where that string of characters goes to embed the credentials. So deployment, there's a couple of different ways to do this. In most environments that have a remote workforce, you probably have some sort of third-party application that can deploy software, such as case system deployment, Microsoft System Center, configuration manager. So there's a number of different ones that can be used. If there is no system available to handle the deployment, your options are a little bit limited. You have a end user installation, and there's some prerequisites for that. There's a help desk installation and the RUM scripting task. So for the end user deployment, the user is required to be a local administrator on their machine, and that is because they will be installing this application. It is not required for the user to be a local administrator to run the application. So in other words, if a third-party application was used to install it, the user can certainly run the utility or restart the service without issue. So a run scripting task can be used if the user is not a local administrator. We can use the RUM console like we would on a normal migration to deploy the software. It is going to be required that the machine is available via VPN and reachable via the RUM console, either by IP address or name. But once you have identified the correct machine, you can push the RUM agent and the scripting task to that machine. The machine will, of course, have to be on the VPN network in order to be reachable. Otherwise, you will fail to deploy it. There's some additional customization that can be done to it. You can brand the UI, so you can customize the verbiage and the banners. We have a file to provide multi-language support, so if you have multiple languages that you're supporting, this file will come in handy. You can also provide a custom icon file, company logo, for example, to help personalize it and make it more user recognizable to your community. Some additional parameters that you can use, and these are optional. You can specify which OU you want to create the computer account in. If you don't specify an OU, by default, it creates it in the computer container. If you have a script redirecting those, then that's what they would end up. Some clients choose to pre-stage the computers in their proper OU. And when the cache credential utility runs and attempts to join the computer to the domain, it will attach to that pre-staged object and likely be ready to receive any GPOs that are available to it. You can also run a PostScript pre-join or post-join. This script, again, should be something small, not software installation replacement type stuff, but if you're trying to flip a registry bit or just make a slight change, you have that option to do that. So troubleshooting, there are some great resources on the Quest knowledge base. You can reach that by support.quest.com. The other locations for some troubleshooting insight would be to review the logs. So the service log is located the program data, Quest software, cache credentials service.log, and the user interface log is under the user's profile under app data, roaming, Quest software, cache credential UI. So those two files will provide some insight as to what is going on with the utility. You do also have the option to increase the logging by changing the log level within the file, and we can discuss that as well. Some of the common issues that you're going to run into, the first one is typically if the host computer is already a member of the target domain, it obviously can't join that domain again. Is CCU installed and configured correctly? Meaning, do you have access to the vMover INI files and the rest of the application files? Do you have the proper rights to write to the log directories? Has the move date passed? So one of the configuration options is to specify a migration date. Typically, we provide a date in the past so that it runs as soon as possible. So look to see if the date is indeed in the past, and if not, adjust that. Is the vMover file accessible? Meaning on your network share that you provided the file, is that file reachable? Also, is the user have an entry in that vMover INI file? So it will look for the logged in user, and this has to be an interactive login. You cannot test this or run this through an RDP session. Is the logged in user in that vMover INI file, then the utility should run. And lastly, fail to move the computer to the target domain. That is typically caused because your service account does not have the rights to write to the domain, or it cannot reach the target domain. Okay, so now we're going to turn and spend a little time doing a demo. There are a couple of scenarios that we're going to cover. Two particularly in this lab. One is with a Windows 7 OS. This user is not a local administrator, so we're going to use the run scripting task to push CCU. And then the other one is a Windows 10 OS, where the user is a local administrator, and the user is going to be installing this application themselves. I was going to control both of the migration processes by providing the vMover INI file when I wanted it to. I think I'm going to change gears a little bit, and for the Windows 10 OS, we're just going to do a user install and have the utility run right from the beginning. Okay, so let's turn to the demo for right now. So here are our Windows 10 machines and our Windows 7 machine. Let's go to the console. So on my C drive in the console, and I would recommend that in production you put this on a second partition. I don't have a partition for my lab. I copy all of the required files from the software download. Which are in here in the cache credential utility. So I copy all of these files to a working directory. This is going to be the directory that I'm going to do my configurations and have my working files. So in my scenario, I have all of my working files here. One of the things that is required is that we encrypt the password. We discussed that a little bit through the PowerPoint slides, and I will show you how that is done. So the first thing that we would do is we would open up a command prompt in an admin. So you can see I've already got my DOS window a little bit larger so I can accommodate the size that of the alphanumeric string that we're going to generate. The file that we need to configure is called the update msi.cmd. And in this file, there are a number of settings that need to be configured. First, we're going to start with the date, right? So we want to have a date in the past. Next, we're going to provide the target net BIOS DNS name. So in this case, it's just target 2016. Then we're going to provide the FQDN of the domain. And in this case, it's target 2016.local. And then we're going to provide a location for where our vMove-RINI file is. So in this demonstration, I've got them on the MIG console under a CCU hidden share and the path to it. I also have a full path to where my log files would be. These are also being copied to the MIG console. Okay. In order to encrypt your password, you would take this command. And let's change this working file to so when you provide the service account here, and you hit enter, you are presented with this alphanumeric string. This is what you want to copy, and you want to copy it to this field here. That's going to be where your password is encrypted. Okay. You can provide some additional configurations. So do you want to delete the target profile? By default, it is yes. This is typically used when a target profile has been inadvertently created by the user logging into the machine prior to the migration. So this allows us to delete that profile and then reprocess it. You have some timeouts that you can specify. This is the timeout that the machine is going to reboot. So the shutdown command will be presented and the machine will reboot within 60 seconds. With the cache credential utility, we actually reboot the machine 2 times because we understand that there's sometimes an issue with updating the DNS name on the machine, and the second reboot will take care of that. The rest of the configuration that we can customize is, as I mentioned, some of the caption headers. Right? You can specify the verbiage that you want to use here, specify the verbiage that you want to use for your computer. If you want to specify the domain name or the company name, you can make those changes. Okay. Then you would save that file And in order to update the setup MSI, you just double click on this file and it will go through and it will update your MSI file. Okay. Now I want to take and copy these required files to my share that I'm actually going to provide to the users. As I stated earlier, there's a script that comes along with the product that will create these shares, these folders, and copy all the information that you need to it. The vMover INI file you will have to copy or generate on your own. I can show you how I have created a scheduled task in order to generate this every day. This is something that you would want to do if you have active migrations happening, as this vMover INI file is static once it's generated. So if you have active migrations going on, you want to make sure and generate a new file often. So in this scenario, we have our vMover INI file copied here. Our apps are in this directory. So here is the setup MSI that I copied to this directory. And this is what we're going to direct the user to launch. Okay, so let's start with the Windows 10 machine. And we would direct the user to this share. So when the user sets up or runs the setup, that MSI, it does expose some of the configuration throughout this. This is the natural way that it's done. I have found a third-party utility that allows you to wrap this, and so I've wrapped this into this file. The third-party utility is pretty straightforward. You literally, it's called SFX Maker, I believe. Where'd it go? I'll show that to you here shortly, but let's get back to the demonstration. So we would run the setup MSI. You would just hit next, next, next throughout this. And as long as they're an administrator and they can install it, we'll install it. And then as soon as the install is complete, and if the vMover INI file is available, they will be presented with this password prompt. So we will provide the password and hit enter. It will then cache that password as long as it was validated and is correct. It will cache that password on the machine, and then it will go through the process of resource processing the machine, right? Just like the RUM console will do, acts much in the same way. So we'll let this run for a couple of seconds. Sorry, let this run for a couple of seconds. And we'll see that the machine will reboot on its own. As you can see, let me show you this. So the service that is installed is the cache credential service. So this is a service that can, if the user was not a member or was not in the vMover INI file and needed to relaunch it, or more than likely was in the wrong date, whatever would require the user to try to initiate, they can restart that service. And as long as that vMover INI file is available and the date is passed, the service will start. This will uninstall itself after it's done. So that's one nice thing about the utility. As I said, this is going to take a few minutes. It looks like it's moving along pretty quickly, so we should be good. Back to the console. Let's cover the rest of this. So here's your logs directory. This is where your error logs will go and your successes logs will go. These two folders will be created the first time that CCU runs. And this is your vmover INI file down here. So I'll show you again how I created a scheduled task to have this generated automatically. In the next demo, we're going to install it via the RUM console, and then we're going to specify when we want the utility to kick off by generating or making available the vmover INI file. And this from this machine as well, once it goes to reboot, I'm going to disconnect the network to simulate a network connection, and then we're going to be simulating being a VPN connected and then losing that connection. So just to validate that we have connectivity to the internet. Yes. And again, this process runs the same process as the RUM console if you were doing a resource processing task. Okay, so this looks like it's almost complete. You should get a reboot message here shortly. There's our reboot sign. So if we were to close this message, it just means that we got rid of the message. The machine is still going to reboot when required. So we can see that right now we still have internet access. We're going to disconnect this machine from the network and go back to it, and we can see that we no longer have internet connection. So we are disconnected. So we're simulating being on a VPN connection, and this machine should reboot. As I said, it'll reboot 2 times. The second reboot will happen shortly after the OS is loaded. So typically it doesn't even give the user an opportunity to log back in. Just make sure and inform your community that that's what's going to happen and have that expectation. So here you're going to see the first restart. And these are VMs, so it should happen fairly quickly. While this is rebooting, let's go to the big console and prep for the next migration. So we're going to delete this vmover INI file so that it is not available. And we're going to be using a RUM scripting task in order to move that machine. So let's see if this is the second reboot happening. Seems this one's taking a little longer than machines. And you'll get a variety of different experiences depending on the machines that you're migrating, how old they are, how much disk space they have, how defragmented the drives are, they've got any viruses, anything like that. So um, if you feel that you have machines that are in those conditions, you have some way of cleaning up temporary files or defragging the drive, that would help the performance of the machine. Also, keep in mind that just like RUM, this process will update any local drives. So if you've got an external drive, 1 or 2 terabyte external drive, it will attempt to update those drives as well. So it can take a little bit longer if that's the case. It must be Patch Tuesday. Okay, looks like it's about to come back up. Let's see if this is the first reboot or the second. Seems a little longer than normal. Okay, so it looks like we're back to our desktop. Let's provide our password. Again, we are still disconnected from the network, so we should be logging in with cache credentials. So we are in. Okay, you can see that we're target user and big info updated. We're target user up here as well. Windows 10. Our desktop remained the same. This is a file I had created in the past, the source profile. So we can see we should not have internet connection right now. No internet connection. So we are at home without VPN connection. So let's simulate making that connection again. And this is a requirement to make that last handshake back to the domain controller to call the migration complete. So see when our network comes up, and we're back. And we're done with the migration. So that's a user-initiated migration from beginning to end. And you can see it's pretty straightforward. As long as your configuration is correct, the user will migrate without issue. Now let's go to this Windows 7 machine. So just to simulate that the user will not be able to install this on their own, we will attempt to do so. And running the same setup MSI, you'll see that we should get an error. Right? I don't have sufficient privileges to install this. So here's a scenario where we would want to have the RUM console push the utility. Okay, so we're going to do just that. As I said, I've removed my vMover INI files because I don't want this to start right away. I want to install the application, showcase that, and then show when we drop the vMover INI file how the utility starts. Okay, so I've already configured a collection and I've added these machines to it. So we're going to do a scripting task. And by the nature of doing a scripting task, it will install the RUM agent on the machine. So you do not necessarily have to do a discovery task first and then a scripting task. You could do the scripting task and it should install the agent. So we're going to use the MSI deploy. It's a pretty simple file. We're just pointing the setup MSI to be a silent install. We're going to tell it to do it immediately and finish. So we can see that the scripting task completed okay. Now we need to go to the machine and we can verify that it was installed by looking at the service. And we can see that the cache credential utility got installed and the service is there waiting for that vMover INI file to appear. Okay. So back to my main console. I have created a scheduled task that will generate the vMover INI file. So the scheduled task is pretty straightforward. I'll show you the scripts that come along with it. First is the scheduled task CMD, and this is just to call PowerShell. It is required that you use the 32-bit version of PowerShell, so make sure that you provide the correct path and then a path to your vMover generation PowerShell script. Okay, and then the PowerShell script is here. Again, if you have installed Migration Manager or PowerRum in a different partition, make sure and edit these fields to point to the right location. Make sure you edit where the location of your file is going to go. All right. And we should be able to generate this file. So let's just test that to make sure. Should end up in our vMover file here. Usually takes a minute or so to generate this. And there's the file. So that's the task that we're going to do for this machine. Okay. So we got our vMover INI file there. We got our client machine. We are logged in. As Amy. And we're going to start the services again. And it recognized that the vMover INI file is now available and presented the password prompt. So again, we're going to do the same thing, provide the password. And it'll go through this. So while this is running, let's just talk about a couple things remaining. So getting support for this, contact support, getting access to purchasing the utility. Again, it comes with the Migration Manager for Active Directory Suite. So you have to contact your sales person. If you go to contactquest.com, you can, I'm sorry, quest.com buy, you can reach out to the sales and figure out who you can talk to about getting access to this utility. And so that's it for the demo. We're going to go back to the machine itself and complete the migration. So we can see again that it is finished and is ready to reboot. You can see that the shutdown message is slightly different between the Windows 10 and Windows 7. We're going to simulate again having internet access. I'm going to disconnect this machine. And we can see we have no internet access. So this machine again will reboot twice. And then we will be done with the migrations. Same with this machine. If you were to click to close, the message is just going to go away. It's still going to reboot the machine. So it's rebooting. Let's simulate disconnecting the machine. Hopefully this machine will reboot the second time much quicker than the first machine. And again, if I didn't mention it before, the target domain will be set as the default login domain. So if you are exposing your last logged in user, their SAM account name should be presented. The target domain should be set, and all the user needs to do is provide their password. So as we can see, oh, here goes the second shutdown. Hopefully this second reboot will happen quicker. Still have the machine disconnected. Should be coming up here shortly. Go. We're going to log into the machine. As you can see, it's representing the target domain with the last logged in user. Well, I just get my password working. Try refreshing this real quick. Okay, so we're logging in. Same password. We're in the target domain. See if we have any connection. Well, somehow my machine got reconnected. Or I did not disconnect it. Anyways, it works the same way as the first machine does, where your last connection is your last handshake back to the domain controller, and then you are done with your migrations. So as you can see, there's a couple of different ways to deploy it, whether the user is a local admin or you are wanting to have a third-party application to migrate the workstation. Again, troubleshooting, there's some logs that you can review. Looking to make sure that the machine joined the domain, things like that are normal. That concludes the presentation of the cache credential utility. If you have any additional questions, please feel free to reach out to any PSO. Thank you for your time.